Hello, everybody. I'm Raul Fernandez, Select Board Member and Chair of the Task Force to Reimagine Policing in Brookline. This is our meeting for Friday, February 5th, 2021. As always, we're going to open up for any thoughts or comments that Task Force members or staff have to share. On our agenda today, we'll approve some meeting minutes, of course. We have an opportunity for subcommittee updates. We all just had public hearings, all the different subcommittees. I think we received an update from the Departmental Analysis Subcommittee at our last Friday's meeting, but from the other 4 subcommittees. So I'm sure there's lots to talk about. I'll just remind everybody, let's keep it to like top notes, key takeaways, things like that. All of this was a matter of public comment, but referencing the comment, not necessarily all the people that we heard from and names and things like that, being respectful of that kind of thing for people that took the time to share with us. Although there are some folks in administration that spoke out on these issues, and I think it'd be fair game to sort of share their perspectives, which I thought were helpful. So we'll do that. And then I am going to present a proposal that's in your packet. It's a proposal for something that is codenamed Brookline Forward, but is essentially a lot of what we've been talking about is the need for greater social service supports, which is one of the places that the police department has sort of stepped in a vacuum where there were not supports provided, or at least not strong enough supports provided by the town. So we'll talk about that, and then any new business that folks have. So first things first, I'm going to open the floor. I don't have much today. I kind of want to get into it, but what say you? Anything on your mind right now before we get going?
Can I make a shameless plug, Raul?
Please do.
So some of you know, I'm on the steering committee of the Brookline Asian American Family Network, and we have our big Lunar New Year event tomorrow at 4 o'clock. It's of course going to be on Zoom, given the circumstances. Usually we're in person, and you can watch it on Big, or there's been flyers and links that have been around. In fact, I'll post links in the chat later. Thank you.
Right. I'll be there. See you there. Anything else? All right. Welcome, Eitan. Welcome, Kim. Good to see y'all. And I didn't get a chance to welcome Ann or Mel. Good to see you too. All right. Let's get into it. First things first. This is approval of the meeting minutes. These are the minutes from Friday, January 29th. Any last minute edits or questions about these minutes? Great, we'll go straight to approval. You know the drill. So let's go down the line. This is again question of approving the meeting minutes from Friday, January 29th, 2021. Malcolm?
Yes.
Ann?
Yes.
Alexander?
Yes.
Kristen?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Chi-Chi?
Yes.
Bonnie?
Yes.
Almas?
Yes.
Kim?
Yes.
Eitan?
Yes.
And I'll go with yes too. Great work as always, and thank you, Devin, for consistently putting out quality minutes that really give a feel for what's been happening in these meetings. So thank you for that. Next up, subcommittee updates. Departmental analysis. Do we have anything or have much to talk about today?
I don't think so. Does anyone disagree?
No, I think one of the only things is I think we talked about this last week, but just to reiterate, I think on the civilian oversight, we've gotten some feedback about sort of making sure that we sort of or wanting to like flesh out some of exactly what that looks like. And I know Chi-Chi responded to that last week. I think we're going to keep our report as is. But as we deliver our recommendations, that's something that we understand can be built on is, there's a lot in the details there around civilian oversight. But I think what we put in the report is a direction, and a direction that we can talk more about during our public meetings and talk about in our meeting before the select board. And if that's a direction that that folks want to go down, then we can actually start to build that out more and start answering some of the more technical questions about how everything might work. Does that make sense? Okay.
Sounds good.
All right.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Thank you, Chi-Chi. All right, well, with that said, let's get into those subcommittees that had hearings this week. The first one is School Resource Officers Subcommittee.
Yeah, I'd be happy to take this up and then we can all share. Was really encouraged by the number of participants that we had. I think even in trying to do some of the sharing about the time, unfortunate that some people couldn't attend based on the timing of it, hoping they had the opportunity to view via either recording or afterwards, but very encouraged about the number of participants, and came away feeling like the process that we were proposing seemed to have resonance for the community. It feels like we were speaking to a number of the needs that they were feeling. It was, I think, a good opportunity also for us to hear from folks who are supportive of SROs, to just so that the conversation didn't seem like it was one-sided. I think it's important that those other perspectives get voiced, but I also appreciated the emergence of this theme that has been part of our ongoing discussions, which is separating out the person. We have a good person doing the work, but that is separate from the work that we need to do and policies that we need to think about best serving youth, families, and our schools. And so I appreciated that we had a good, vigorous conversation about that. Thanks.
I would add, I think our report says it, but it was also very clear to me, like with some folks who are particularly school personnel, have a hard time separating the idea of school police relationship and perhaps liaison versus a school resource officer. There was a lot of hold to a school resource officer as if that had been a really old idea, and say, oh, well, we've had them for such a long time. And that's not really what the school resource officer is. And so it just made me think, I felt like it's in a report, but maybe we need to make that more pronounced. And yeah, I mean, that's as much on me as anybody else, but to me, it was just clear as they were talking about like helping with things for like years. And I was like, well, that can't be the school resource officer because the school resource officers are actually very new. Right. And so, how do we parcel those two out? Two things, or how do we separate those two things to meet the needs of the town as well as I think the needs of the schools. I also felt in some ways our language needed to be a little stronger. I felt like there's a really resounding thing of like, why are police officers stationed in our schools? And maybe I misheard that. I also want to be upfront. There was a meeting with students around the school resource officer that was really specific to Brookline High School about an hour and a half before that public hearing. So I may be blending information, but I felt like in that, when I look back at my notes, there was real strong contention about like, why are they stationed there? And so, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I both in the sense of, I think there's a few things that we need to make clear in the report based on some of the feedback that we were getting. And also, I agree. I've been reflecting a lot since our meeting. I think we do need stronger language given the feedback we received. One of the pieces of feedback that I have, starred here in my notes, was that we didn't hear from students. And the point, the reason for that, our meeting was at 1:00, but I think we need to work hard to see whether we can get some responses from students before the full task force meeting. And I'd love to hear some more about the meeting that occurred just before ours. So I have no doubt we'll talk about that next week. But my main conclusion so far is I do think we need stronger language. I think there's a lot of folks concerned about why we have an SRO there. and I think that we can. I think in some ways, you know, we went to a lot of effort to make the report thoughtful and nuanced, for discussion of, if you want the SRO, here's what would need to happen. I think maybe we need to be a little more powerful, particularly along the lines of, there shouldn't be an SRO until these things happen, because the process for having an SRO, if you look at the history, has not been public. And we need to get this all out in the public and have a public conversation, bare minimum, if to discuss whether we want one, because we no longer have to have one.
Yeah, can I just jump on that really quickly, Alexander? I think we tried in the language of our report to try to lay out a sequence that says by the beginning of the fall, we strongly suggest that these things happen. And I think part of what I hear you saying is that we may need to be a little less equivocal about it, in that don't move forward, because I think there is the risk that, well, timing, and we couldn't quite get things organized. And so then inertia of existing policy kicks in. And so it may be that we need to be more insistent that these must happen before it continues, rather than putting them off and then continuing with the approach because we couldn't quite get things sequenced the way you recommended.
I also want to say, I think that's what we heard in the public hearing as well. Like I think we heard that, certainly not from everyone, but I think we heard that from enough people, like to say, like, why is there a school resource officer located in a school? Yeah. So.
Thoughts, or I know some other folks were at these hearings too. Do you have any other thoughts or questions for this group? Well, I'll just. Oh, Anne, you go first.
Yeah, sorry. This isn't particularly for this group, but for all of the subcommittee meetings that I attended, and I think I attended all of them, I was surprised by the amount of support. I found these subcommittee public hearings to be incredibly supportive of our work, of our recommendations. And if anything, my impression walking away from them is a little, I forget who said it, maybe it was Alex said it, that we could even make these recommendations a bit stronger, that we were trying very hard to present them in a way that was open. Our recommendations were not necessarily, this is what needs to happen, but these are the next steps. And obviously we always want community feedback and participation in what happens, but they were very supportive. I found that the public was very open to what we were suggesting, and that's just something to take into consideration moving forward.
Thanks, Anne. Chi-Chi?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, with respect to the hearing on the SRO, I did watch that. And one sense I got was that the folks, mostly from the school system, who were more supportive of the SRO, what it seemed like is that here was a person who was a resource, who was doing things. And what they were concerned about is, if you remove that person, you don't have that FTE doing things. And what that argues for isn't necessarily keeping the SRO, but replacing them with another person to do things who would be more qualified to do those things. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of the feedback that I caught too, is the taking an officer out of uniform and not having having them leave their gun at home or at the office, and those kinds of things. All it's it's starting from a position of an officer needs to be there, and sort of trying to fit that officer, that square peg into a circular hole, which is someone that can provide the kinds of resources and supports that everyone, I think, agrees are necessary and that we don't have enough of for young people. Rather than be able to say, okay, clearly those resources are needed. Let's start. If we built from the ground up and said, how are we best going to address these resources, we probably wouldn't arrive at having a police officer do it. We'd arrive at some different conclusion. I felt the same thing from the feedback, also some of the written feedback that we've gotten. I still have some more feedback in my inbox that I need to share with Devin and the task force about this too. That I think was looking for some stronger recommendations, frankly. Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts here? Okay. All right. So you've got your work cut out for you. We're expecting next week to have the final draft report from your subcommittees, which will become part of the larger report that we present 2 Wednesdays from now on the 17th at our task force public hearing. So I suspect you'll be meeting once, maybe twice. I don't know, however long it takes you to make whatever updates you need to make between now and then. So let us know what kind of support you need. Great. Okay, next up is the Walk and Talk Subcommittee.
Good morning. I very much wished there were more people in attendance with comments at our Walk and Talk hearing. What we did get was a look into BHA, one particular BHA resident experience, which is really important. Something that I heard was, well, from this particular person, was more their concern on the side of Brookline Housing Authority and perceived rules and regulations that they may or may not have, rather than the police. But if policing practices either create the perception of housing insecurity, and this was a reflection that someone had sent back to me. If policing practices either specifically create the perception of housing insecurity, then that's an issue. This person was worried that, and actually their testimony was included in our report. So what we heard at the hearing was not new. They're concerned that police might be reporting any incidents that happen at BHA to BHA, resulting in the possibility of loss of tenancy. Technically, those are not rules that are on the books, but if that is happening in one way or another, and that's being perceived by residents, then that is a problem. And perhaps, I think looking at what police may be responding to and building more robust non-police response for things like domestic violence and whatever other issues there might be there. But I also am really curious about who else was at the hearing and what kind of nuances you heard. We also heard outreach to non-BHA residents to see what of the Walk and Talk program might be appreciated by other neighborhoods in need. So less spreading the Walk and Talk program and more like, these are services that this neighborhood is provided. Does this sound good to you? And seeing how these things, appreciation of those services might, how high that is across town. Do you all, Anne and Kim, do you have perspectives? I mean, mainly we heard very few comments actually.
Yeah.
In our
So, yeah, I wish there were more, comment, people there to comment about walk and talk. It was kind of disappointing, but also I understood as a BHA resident, I wanted to validate that person, but I knew that was not the platform for that. And a lot of stuff that she said is true, about how, I won't get into that, but one of the thoughts I was thinking when I think it was, I can't remember the person's name, but she asked about whether we talk to other people about the walk and talk program. And in my opinion, other areas of Brookline, their opinion about the walk and talk program doesn't really matter to me because it doesn't affect them. People are not walking and talking in Bonnie's neighborhood or Ann's neighborhood. They're walking, they're in BHA. And so I don't think that our report, and correct me if I'm wrong, I just don't think it needs to reflect that in any way.
Right. I agree. I don't think I have any other comments that Bonnie and Kim haven't already made. I wish there had been more public comment, but that's, as we all know, has been an issue going along in terms of getting community engagement, and having people feel comfortable to make public comments on, these Zoom public hearings is a whole other extra step of being identifiable. So
It's also 9 a.m. on a Wednesday.
And it was 9 a.m. on a Wednesday as well. I think it went well. We need to have more community conversations.
Mm-hmm. I think our recommendations about the fact that walk and talk is not, police are not appropriate to be providing those services is the finding. Our recommendations are the follow-up to that, and they kind of represent the spectrum of perspective on our subcommittee, like the difference between removing the program altogether and slowly phasing it out as we bring up other programs, so to replace the police in that position. So I would have really appreciated more to chew on from that, but it is what it is. Maybe it's possible. I don't know. I don't want to suggest having another hearing at a different time. Are you nodding in a hell no way or a yes we should way, Kim?
So it's funny. I was just going to ask Raul, is it possible that we could have another public hearing for the Walk and Talk subcommittee? Because I feel like we did not get enough public feedback on that subcommittee. And I feel like that entire hearing, meeting, whatever you want to call it, was dominated by that resident, but it was, I get it, it's necessary. And we should form another task force for the BHA. That's a whole nother thing I'm going to talk to you on the back end about, Raul. But it would be nice to have another public hearing at a time that would, maybe more people would show up and we could hear their voices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's certainly nothing preventing the subcommittee from doing that. I will say that the deadline for the report to be in by next Friday won't change. So would somehow need to fit within that schedule. And I think we would, through some kind of direct outreach or something, knowing, for instance, that there are going to be 5 to 7 to 10, whoever, number of people who live in public housing who are willing to be at a meeting and share their feedback, I think would be, I think that would be really meaningful. I agree that the perspective of folks who aren't, patrolled by the walk and talk unit on whether or not they think it's a good idea isn't necessarily particularly helpful for anyone. It's on the perspective of folks that were there. I will say the other thing is, and I know this was noted on one of the reform committee meetings, but even the walk and talk survey that went out, the vast majority of responses were from people who were white and people who were seniors. And even the 6 responses, let's say from Black people living in public housing, 1, 2, 3, 4 of them were 65 plus. One of them fell within the 51 to 64-year-old category, and one of them was in the 36 to 50-year-old category. So we still have not heard the voices of younger people in our community, and particularly in BHA. And so, anything we could do to hear those voices and their perspectives, I think would be especially important.
If there was some way we could do it privately, that would be so much better.
Right. And this is, whoever was there heard me speak about this sort of toward the end, about the fear and mistrust that so many people have, the fear of losing their housing for speaking out about issues. And in some cases that might be perceived, threats. In other cases, people have real stories, like we heard recently, about folks who at least, feel like they've lost their housing because of issues that are unrelated to why they're there in the first place. We have to talk more about that. Our task force does. I hope the reform committee does too. Is why we see so few people to whom this obviously matters, that are unwilling, or not showing up to places where they would have to publicly share their stories and concerns. And that's been a real issue throughout this entire process, and it's got to be part of I know it is. It's got to be it's got to be part of our report. Kristen.
Just gonna go off video just so the audio doesn't get bad, but this feels like it's central to what we're trying to get the town to take up from the community engagement recommendations of those smaller conversations. And we can't get to where we need to go by using public hearings and places where people have to, it is an indelicate framing, but places where people of color have to bleed in public is not necessarily going to be the way for us to make better public policy. It's not going to be the way for us to elicit the responses that we need to help us inform the public policies by making people of color bleed in public. And so I think that is central to why we were saying that we both need to have the smaller conversations and we need to make a commitment to continuing them. And I don't know if Kimberly, you feel like that might be a way for us to not have to race for a Friday deadline, but to make some commitment to say these conversations have to continue in some way.
I mean, we certainly have committed to that. The optics, optics would obviously be better, if we had solid responses from BHA residents, but, it's worth a try, obviously. I mean, I wonder, I wonder if, I don't know, I don't want to try to sneak around OML rules or anything, but we gotta do something try to do something between now and next Friday.
I think Bonnie, if there's a way to capture like individual narratives through one-on-one conversations, if people are willing to write and share, that would be terrific. And they can send something in to you and get shared with the subcommittee and the task force. If people are willing to just sit down and talk with you and you can sort of transcribe the conversation, and maybe Anne has some ideas here too. I think you're right. Kristen's right. The idea of asking these people to share these stories in public is really problematic. Anne, what do you think?
And me, Anne?
No, Anne Braga.
I just wanted to offer a thought and possibly an option, in maybe Malcolm can help with this, is what if you were to look to set up an opportunity with the high school and the middle school, whether they have a student council operating remotely or whatever, where you can come and be a guest at their meeting, where it's not public. It's not as largely attended, but they're in a space where they're with their colleagues if they want to share. And then they have an opportunity to reach out to you, Bonnie, or the person who's going to do this individually to tell their story, and be able to get some youth voices where you're going to their space as opposed to them coming to your space.
Yeah. Malcolm, can I ask you what that meeting that sort of preceded the SRO meeting, like, were you able to capture sort of and you know, not exactly what happened in that meeting, but the sentiments of the young people that were there in that meeting? I don't know if it was just the SRO about larger issues, but
so, you know, I think I'm pretty, I'm carrying two hats with the SRO. There's the committee work, which is more broad district-wide, but then also as the MECO coordinator at Brookline High School, we've been examining the role. And one of the things, we sent a parent survey out, which actually got into, I guess, the emails, not the hands of some of you on this call. And then we wanted to follow up with kids. And so that was the first meeting the other day. And one of the things that was really clear was many kids had no idea, not just that there was a school resource officer, but why there was a school resource officer. And then after, the meeting was not very long. I think it was a total of 40 minutes during, for folks who know the BHS schedule, what we call X block. Towards the end, you just heard kids saying, why do we have one? Like I don't understand the need. I also want to be really clear. There were a total of, I think, 13 kids. I also think one of the things that was, I'll say, a misstep on the high school. We had no kids who identified as in steps to success at that meeting. So, when we talk about walkie-talkie people from Brookline Public Housing, we missed that voice. We're currently doing all we can to make sure they're at the next meeting for students. Because it's such an important voice. And not that we had kids who were in scholars, we had kids from MECO. And for those of you who have children, X Block is a time when a lot of clubs meet. It's when a lot of kids use it as downtime. Like, I don't want to take that as a slight that STEPS kids didn't show up. It was the end of the quarter. We turned in grades on Wednesday. So, it's also a free time where a lot of kids catch up on homework and make up assignments. Like, there's all kinds of reasons we might not have had kids there from STEPS, but we didn't. And so I think, and I would say that is very much localized to the high school resource officer, as opposed to the broad that we were looking at. Right. And so we're going to have 2 more meetings with kids, and then have 1 meeting where we invite adults who are connected to children in scholars, MECO and STEPS. I know that they were trying to figure out with all the coordination with stuff at the high school in March. It'll be the first week in March for that adult meeting. And I don't mind sharing, when we surveyed parents in the fall from those 3 programs, 3/4 of the parents and adults and caretakers had no idea there was a school resource officer. So, I mean, it, I keep coming back to this. It's hard to say something is community oriented when most people don't know it exists. Right. If that's school children and adults, and frankly, teachers. I mean, there's a lot of school personnel. I had no idea we had a school resource officer. It's hard to call that a community oriented thing.
Right. I think we saw that also in the response on the walk and talk survey that the reform committee put out. Is about half the folks weren't sure or were not aware of the program. Somehow still filled out the survey, even though they said, I don't know anything about this program, but let me fill out the survey.
Yeah. I think, I would say, I'm sorry. No, Ann's idea is pretty good. I think, again, one thing about Brookline Public Schools, which is great and terrible, no school functions the same. They're truly icons within their communities. So, like, Driscoll may have a school council and Ridley may not. Like it's just like the people to contact may be the vice principal, the principal, the PTO president, or the secretary, depending upon which building you're calling to. So we could do that. I would also suggest, but I think it's a good idea. I don't think we should shy away from that. And I think we could use the teen center as well as a hub for kids who would come and share their voice, because it is a little more hangout and they could also help orchestrate it. As opposed to Brookline rec programs are usually very sort of driven with activities. So like they have a lot of kids who go there who might be willing to speak, but the nature of their work is that you get there and you do something right away. Whereas kids hang out at the teen center. They could like say, hey, we're going to do this at 3, and kids are there and they'll just show up maybe. But it'd be interesting to plug in and see what we hear from school age children.
Thanks, Malcolm.
Excuse me. Oh, sorry, Anne, go ahead.
It's okay. No, go ahead.
I was just gonna, I was at the Reform Committee's report on the survey, the Walk and Talk survey, and there was interest in going through the teen center to talk about the Walk and Talk program. And so we reached out. I believe Caitlin Starr was gonna try and organize that. And what was a great idea that she responded with was that the teen center would have the conversation. It would not be our conversation. Because they have the relationship with those kids. And that makes a lot of sense to me. So maybe, I don't know what kind of time frame is appropriate to be able to ask that of the teen center. I did reach out to Caitlin, so hopefully we would be looped into that effort by the Reform Committee, but that would be wonderful. What kind of, Malcolm, what kind of, I don't, to be able to have a similar conversation about walk and talk officers at the high school, is that even appropriate? I'm not sure, because that singles people out that live in Brookline Housing Authority. Is that, I feel like that's a fuzzy, weird line.
It is. I need to think about it a little more deeply, but the first thought that comes to my head is, we have a program that works with kids in Brookline housing. I mean, like we have a distinct program for that to support children and families, and the numbers are dramatic. How many kids went to post-secondary things once the program started. So I don't think it's far-fetched to reach to them to have a discussion. They also start in 4th grade, so you could have access to perhaps some middle school children around that. I don't know how far. I don't feel qualified to ask 9-year-olds questions about this, personally, but maybe someone else is. I don't think it's far-fetched to reach out to them about that potential of a conversation. And I don't know what they'd say. They're going through a little bit of, I don't know, people saw Shoma is stepping down, but not until June. And that's the Steps Inc. side, not the school side. But they work super close together. But my sense is she'd be willing to help communicate with parents and children and all the rest.
Mm-hmm.
So let me just say briefly, we've, I mentioned next Friday, I want those subcommittee reports in, but our final report to the task force, to the select board is not till March 2nd. So there's still, on the timeline, this may not make it into your, the draft that's going to be presented on the 17th, but there's still an opportunity. So I don't want to make you feel as if these meetings have to happen next week. And if they can't, then we won't be able to do them. So I think there should be some urgency to this, of course, and to make this outreach right away, because things take time to schedule. But it sounds like reaching out to, you've already done this to the teen center, and then also to Shoma at Steps is, we'll at least get us some folks in a room. And I like the idea of them hosting the conversation and us being present. I do worry about, I don't know if this is part of the plan or not, but I do worry about police officers being present in those conversations and the impact that might have on the discussion. So I would argue against that.
Agreed.
That was one of my concerns is the teen center, the walk and talk officers do go there and do things like play basketball and stuff. So I think it would be important to time it so that these conversations happen when there aren't walk and talk officers there, which may make kids feel less comfortable really speaking about what it's like for them.
I don't think they're present in the space right now.
Oh, well, actually, COVID, I don't know what is going on, but they do go there and
Yeah.
interact with kids. So I don't know.
I
They do
talked
have
with
some programs that are happening, but not many. So
I talked with Alicia Adamson like right after MLK Day or something like that, and she said they were not fully open. I don't know I can't remember exactly what that means.
right. I want to, if there are other thoughts on this, I want to hear them, but I also want to make sure we have time for the other.
I would just also say STEPS does a lot of programming with the kids during breaks, and so there might be some windows open.
February.
Yeah, they do a lot of programming with their kids during breaks. My sense is that is all set, and my sense is they're also really flexible. Like if they found value, they could make time as well.
Thank you.
Good. Very helpful conversation.
Mhm.
All right. Oh, by the way, for the, it sounds like we got some good feedback from that meeting on the SRO. I'd written this down and I'd forgotten. I know I'd mentioned at the hearing, the group Students Against Institutional Racism and possibly reaching out to them. And the other I forgot to mention is Kazi, who is the student representative on the CDICR, the Commission for Diversity, Inclusion, Community Relations, and sort of getting his perspectives and maybe, others that he knows that might want to weigh in too, I think would be helpful. Okay.
I can reach out to him. He's also the co-leader of SARE.
Okay.
And the leader of the Black Student Union. So yeah, Kazi's pretty awesome.
All right, next up we have the Envisioning/Community Engagement Subcommittee.
Yeah, I feel like the only thing to talk about as it comes to that hearing is what feels like a pretty well-received, full-throated endorsement of the vision that Malcolm set forth about the youth-centered public safety. And so I think it's best to cede the floor to Malcolm on that, but it feels like that was the focal point of the meeting, lots of support for that. And I think the challenge that it sounds like is coming out of that discussion is whether or not we might link that to whether it becomes closer to warrant articles, budget revisions, or specific policy recommendations for the town. But
sorry, I was saying, right. Malcolm, did you want to expand on any of that?
I think only that, particularly as we come to closure, I'm pretty sure attended most every one of our public forums is Carolina San Miguel, who's the new community engagement organizer out of Lloyd's office. This work is super important to her. Children are super important to her. She actually spoke at our public hearing, but all of this work is really important. And she has really strong skills that might help us with some of our engagement things in terms of like reaching certain populations and getting to hear their voices. And I think, I don't know, it was good for me to hear all that positive feedback because it does very much remind me, as things I said early on about my childhood, where I felt like the town provided a lot of opportunities. It used to provide a lot of opportunities for poor kids. I mean, those housing developments have been there since I was a kid, and so, yeah, I agree. I don't know. I don't follow enough around budgeting to know how to make that happen. And I know there's some ideas where you talk about like sort of some type of center for more wraparound services and stuff. But yeah, the teen center is one of the places where they're asking for services. The rec is just kind of asking for more of a transportation budget. They feel like their staffing is fine. But and I hope the town is willing to make some of the partnerships that we've made in the past that I tried to draw out. Like Steps to Success comes from a partnership between Brookline Public Schools and Brookline Housing. And so does the BRIGHT program, the Brookline Youth Resiliency transition program at Brookline High School, which is nationally known for kids who have long, either consistent illnesses or long hospitalizations. And it's a way to slowly migrate them back into school with support that's both academic and emotional and social, as well as mental health. And we share that with the Brookline Mental Health Center, as well as the Brookline Public Schools. And I think the town needs to step up in that same way. You know, the town could create partnerships. They don't have to own it all. They could create, like the teen center said, they were really willing to fundraise to help support some of those initiatives, but they can't support what they're asking for is at least 3 around the clock supports, whether that's, I mean, they said mental health counselors and social workers. I don't think they care how we split those 3 up, but, you know, to help as a town and share some of that, because it would actually help our children be healthy. And it's not a slight, but that would help our children be healthy in ways that's different than people playing basketball with them after school. You know what I mean? Like it just would help different. And so, yeah. And so I think like as a town, we have to think about that. I just don't know where to fit that into budgetary type things and how that works. I just know that we've done it before. And so we should be able to do it again, especially if we know that's going to benefit children.
Other thoughts or questions for this group? I'll just add that it was a phenomenal presentation. The feedback was amazing. I also wanted to mention Carolina San Miguel, our new community engagement strategist. Lloyd, thank you for finding her. I heard her also speak at the Commission for Diversity, Inclusion, Community Relations a couple weeks back, and she's phenomenal. Very excited about this work and is ready to get involved. So that's great. Good. All right, folks. Let us go to Vulnerable People and People in Crisis Subcommittee.
So we had our meeting last night. I would echo what I think Kristen said, that we had fairly overwhelming support from everybody who came in to speak. People were really, really strongly supportive of all the recommendations that we made. We heard as well from some folks living down in Brookline Village Way who are putting together some public forums in the next few weeks, and they wanted to know how they could get the word out about what this task force is doing and what they could do to help us and to make sure that their voices were heard. So we had some conversations about community engagement. It, generally speaking, it went really, really well, and we had a pretty strong turnout.
Agree. It was incredibly supportive. We heard from a lot of new voices, folks that we hadn't heard from in other forums, other meetings, and there just seems like there's very strong support for changing the model. One person who is a writer for the Sagamore, senior at BHS, reached out to me afterwards, wants to write a story about it, get more high school support. So that was great. But, you know, again, as other folks have been saying this morning, the one group of people that we would really love to hear from are people who've experienced these types of interventions while being in a crisis of some sort. Folks who've had the police come to support them when in crisis, and what those experiences have been like, what they would like to see changed, if anything, what, you know, obviously that's a hard group to reach. for various reasons, but I would very much like to hear from them. It's possible that maybe we could reach out to some folks via the Brookline Community Mental Health Center, which name I always mess up. I think that's the correct wording of the name. The Brookline community maybe could help us reach out to some folks, but it's a hard population to reach for obvious reasons. I think that would be it would be really important to have people who've had those experiences on any kind of ongoing committee that we may form to actually change the services. I think people with lived experience would be very, very important to have actively helping to create new services and supports.
And just to add from me, I wanted to say, like, the highlights for me was one of the questions was about data that the police department collect. And then I know one of our apprentices has information about that data from CIT, but I feel like that is something that I felt like they haven't delved into enough. Like, what are the outcomes? So this person asked, like, what are the outcomes? Was the use of force? I feel like we don't have that information as to what happens when these calls happen and what the follow-up is. And so, like, I feel like that's a piece, that we didn't quite get to. So I just wanted to bring that up. I think that, the other things that stood out for me was somebody talked about getting to the root causes. They really love the idea of that social service department, but they added not only coordination, but root causes. And I know, Raul, we're going to talk about your proposal later, which kind of addresses that. But that also was sort of hit me, that makes a lot of sense. And just in regard to what Malcolm said about the Bright program, one of the people talked about it. And the interesting thing, she said, like, yeah, we did it in school, but why isn't there something like that for the community, like an expansion or something like that? So I think that was also interesting. I think those were the pieces I had. I think the other thing is, like, you sent out our report to all the task force members. I think, Anne, you sent it out last week. So we've heard back, I think, from Mike. So thank you, Mike. But again, if other people have feedback, it's on Google Docs. So you have editing capability.
Commenting, yeah.
Right. So.
Okay. Do you have something else, Amma? Oh, you're good. Okay.
Sorry, just one more quick thing. I thought when Anne was talking about hearing more stories, I know the Police Reform Committee has done some of that but again, it's like, it's like a one-on-one, and like, again, it's like the confidentiality, like, how do we like get those stories? But I know that listening in to some of the, they've done interviews with people who are unhoused, mental health issues, but like, how do you get access to those things so just wanted to say that as well.
Yeah, I would just say that the same, what we just talked about with Walk and Talk, I would say the same. If you can partner with the Brookline Center, as it's called, to reach folks in a way that does not ask them to share their stories publicly, I think that might be the best way to get some people and to learn more about people's experiences. But yeah, certainly the public hearing format does not lend itself to getting some of the really important stories that are out there that we need to hear, and frankly that our community needs to hear, but not at the expense of as Kristen said earlier, having people sort of bleed in front of us. I think that's a really important point. Anything else here?
I think I have a more general comment. I don't. So if somebody has something more specific to this, I can wait.
Go for it, Malcolm.
Yeah. So I mean, I think about something Bonnie said earlier, and I can't remember where or when, Bonnie, and so I apologize. But it takes time to build trust. and no matter what, we represent the town in a task force that's under the select board and other stuff. And that takes time. And I know people have worked, you know, to the bone to try and make these connections, but it's going to take more time. And so I wonder, you know, if that should be something in our reports about, you know, understanding that we just didn't have the time to build that trust in a way to get people to come to us with confidence. I mean, I think people have spoken to us freely and spoken with confidence when they had the opportunity. And I think we've worked really hard to try and provide opportunities. But I don't think we had enough time to create communal trust where like enough people would say, oh no, you can talk to them. They will look after you. They will respect you. And I say that not as a slight. I understand we have timetables and I understand why we have to get this done when we do, in case it has budget implications and all kinds of other things like that. Like I really don't want anybody to see this as a knock on the process as much as a real feeling of like, if we just drop on March 2nd, that lack of trust will stay. It may even increase. Because people will say, oh, they just did it to write the report and now they're not going to come around anymore. So I just think we have to think about that in our final reporting. And I don't have the exact answer, not even for the committees I'm on. So, but I just, yeah, I mean, Kristen's comment about, you know, people bleeding in publicly is real, as well as, you know, building confidence and trust at a town is truly looking out for you beyond the report.
And it's been one of my biggest fears throughout this whole process is us, either embarking on this reimagining journey and then not quite reimagining anything and ending up in a reform space, and then B, which is still a real possibility, is us coming up with a novel approach, certainly a different orientation to addressing these problems, and then having that fall on deaf ears. And so, that's been with me every week, this whole of this entire process every week. So we'll see where this goes, but I do want to make sure A is something we can control. The first thing. B is something we can't necessarily control. We can, bring forces to bear and put out the best report we can. And, folks that have been out on these subcommittee meetings supporting the work that you're putting out there, show up again on the 17th, show up again on the 2nd. We've got that survey to rely on that bolsters, the claims in our report and our recommendations. We've got it all, but we cannot control what other people do with it once it's there. But the first thing we can control, what we actually recommend and how strong and interconnected those recommendations are, that is something we can control. Bonnie?
Can we have a conversation, not now necessarily, but what happens after? If we could have the if the town shows enthusiasm for any part of this, but also understanding that the possibilities for all that we want are kind of, it's an uphill battle. So the possibility of people being enthusiastic about it in town and what happens with us then, and the real possibility that because there's a reform committee, we get brushed aside because this is an enormous ask that we're making. So how do we as a group, if possible, who's here wants to continue doing this work, what that might look like? I would love to be able to do that.
Yep. Me too.
And whether it still continues to be a town task force or whatever.
Yeah, I agree. We'll certainly meet. That select board presentation is scheduled for the 2nd. I'd certainly want us to meet on the 5th, that Friday, to talk about how that went. I don't know if there are going to be more presentations needed to the select board, or that'll be just for the select board, and a public hearing that the select board will come later. So it's undetermined at this point. I'll check with the chair, but it's undetermined at this point how much longer our official work will need to go beyond March 2nd, although I know at least March 5th. And I agree that we're going to, based on the response from the board, members of the task force in their own, individual capacities might want to consider sort of alternative options and the town meeting process and things like that, if you'd like to move certain elements forward that don't get adopted right away. Yeah. Okay. All right. With that said, there's more time at the end for new business or other thoughts that folks would like to share. I do want to make sure we have substantial time for. Cool. Oh, okay, good. For this proposal that was shared with you in your packets. For the benefit of the public, I'll also share it on screen now. 1 second. Should be it. And before I do that, let me just introduce. This is a proposal for, this really feeds in, is a result of the work that you've all done on the subcommittees. And what I've heard loud and clear on many of your subcommittee meetings, even before the public hearings, is, a general agreement that the current approach is at best insufficient and in some ways actually detrimental to certain members of our community, right? That's literally the reason that that both the committee and the task force were created, because there were enough people in our community that saw a problem that needed to be addressed. I don't think we need to make the case that is real, because otherwise we wouldn't be here, right? And so while it seems like we're in this general agreement and consensus that the current approach is insufficient, saying that alone won't actually necessarily improve the state of affairs for people in our community. So what I present to you now is a proposal to actually fill those gaps that I know we all agree exist there. So let me share that now. Okay. Cool. Full on that. Okay, there we go. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that? Okay, good. Hopefully others can too. So this is a proposal to strengthen social services in Brookline. And essentially it would create a new social service agency, a departmental office within the Brookline town government. And really the goal here is to address gaps in the social safety net that are, including some that are currently being addressed by the police department. The focus would be to address both the symptoms, but the sort of novel innovation here is to really also focus on the root causes of all the inequities that I talk about in the next section. And the name Brookline Forward is just a placeholder. I think it sounds pretty cool, but this office could end up being called something else. I'll note too, and I look forward to Mel sharing any thoughts he wants to share today, but Mel Kleckner and I have sort of sat down, looked at this, and had a conversation about it. I think a productive conversation about this too. So the idea here is that this office, called Brookline Forward, is going to provide residents with services and supports they need to thrive. New, innovative department of the town. Brookline Forward will partner with the Brookline Housing Authority, the Public Schools of Brookline, the Senior Center even, and local social service agencies like many that we've discussed in these meetings, to deliver timely critical services while also conducting research, analyzing data, and implementing programs designed to counteract economic, health, and other inequities that are deeply rooted in racism, sexism, ageism, and other forms of oppression. It would bring together in a model where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, bring together existing offices like the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations, the Council on Aging, and the Office of Veterans Services, but also establish new offices. Offices like Youth and Family Services that would address a lot of the issues that we've been talking about today, and also Immigrant and Refugee Services, which I know is something that the Commission for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations has identified as a big gap for us as a community, is the kinds of supports and services we provide to folks in the immigrant and refugee communities. And then also bringing in, again, the whole being greater than the sum of its parts, bringing in folks from the Domestic Violence Roundtable and the Commission for Women and the Brookline Commission on Disability to make sure we have a whole community approach, as well as I contemplate here establishing a new council on LGBTQIA+ inclusion, which we don't currently have. This office will also partner with other town departments as necessary to meet community needs. That could include working with Health and Human Services to develop a mental health incident response team, something our folks in the Vulnerable People and People in Crisis Subcommittee have in their recommendations. Could mean partnering with building and the fire department to ensure residents are living in safe housing across Brookline, and with the police department on diversion efforts for youth, something that we know needs to continue. How would this be funded? Well, by municipal dollars, including funds shifted from the police department, as well as, just like other departments, local, state, and federal grants as well. And in addition to existing personnel, I contemplate that new staff at inception might include, of course, administrative support, as well as professional staff members, and yes, a new commissioner to help lead this effort. And I say that because this is a new way forward, which is very different than our current model of addressing the symptoms of issues. We see, by the way, elements of this, and I'm going to actually stop sharing so I can see you all. You should all have this document, by the way, and for anyone, members of the public, it's publicly available too. I think we see the elements of this in the Racial Equity Advancement Fund, for instance, that is really designed to eliminate racial disparities within our community, right? And that it's going to fund programs and projects that do that. That's the orientation that this model would take. Is yes, making sure that we are addressing the symptoms of problems, of course, that's absolutely necessary, and putting more resources there, but also doing the harder work of figuring out where these disparities are coming from within our own community and the region, and investing resources in that. And there's more to say about that, but I'll probably do it in response to any questions you have about any of this. So let me kind of open the floor. Mel, I don't know if you have anything you want to say at the outset, and then we'll hear from members of the task force with any questions, thoughts, questions. Yeah.
Sure. Well, thanks, Raul. Morning, everybody. Yeah, I had opportunity to talk with Raul, and I think this is the kind of conceptual work that is so important and really was why the task force was created, to think outside the box a bit and think ahead. And so I think it's a very interesting proposal. From a management point of view, it's good to consolidate and coordinate under accountable, an organization that to make these things happen. So there's some interest in that. I think what I told Raul, and I'll tell you all, that this type of a reorganization has a lot of challenges, some legal challenges. The way the town's organized, we'd have to revise bylaws and then maybe even special acts that have created our existing organization. There's some budget challenges. I don't think it's as simple as just moving the money around. I think we're talking about enhancing some services here, and then politically, I don't think I have to tell you. You've seen it in a lot of your discussions that a lot of people like to hold on to what exists for good reasons sometimes. So my recommendation or advice to Raul was to try to make sure it's conceptual, and you're trying to identify the goals and some of the objectives here before it can, before it even has a chance. We don't want to get too much in detail before it, and so to implicate some of those political issues. I think we want to give it a life and talk about it. So that's why I'm suggesting to keep it relatively general. Thank you, Raul.
Great, thank you, Mel. So let's see, Mike, let's go to you first. We haven't heard from you today.
Right, so actually Mel said a couple of things that I was going to say. I was making notes as you were talking, Raul, and one of the things I wrote down was, well, what about economic equity? I think that belongs under the same umbrella. To me, economic equity is a critical issue. It's something the town has, at least town meeting has passed a resolution encouraging the use of funds from the marijuana impact taxes that we're receiving, fees that we're receiving to send in that direction. I will say it's not just a matter of rearranging funding, it's a matter of finding new dollars. And that's if we're providing new services, then you have to find new dollars for it. And that takes time. That's not to say that we shouldn't do it. I want to make that really clear. I think this is a really interesting concept. It goes back to the point that several of you have made. Okay, what do we do next? And how do we, because it's going to take more than putting this on a piece of paper and going to the select board. It's going to take some thinking about, working with Mel, thinking about, well, okay, where did the dollars come from specifically? How many FTEs do we need? One FTE is about $100,000. Okay, we don't pay people $100,000, unfortunately, but that's what it costs between fringe benefits and all of that. So it seems to me like the forward step is, okay, here's the overall concept. Now let's look at the ugly details that are necessary to put it into effect.
Great, thanks, Mike. It's really helpful, especially coming from your role. Bonnie, I saw you unmute before. I'm sure you have thoughts or questions.
Yeah, I'm gonna hold it.
Okay. Others?
I just want to briefly add that the Vulnerable People Subcommittee actually incorporated this suggestion into our subcommittee report. And we think this would be a really important and valuable way to implement a lot of our recommendations.
Thank you.
This is separate from what my thought was before, but what brings me great joy and satisfaction is how wonderfully all of our subcommittees, and I don't think it was I don't think it was designed this way. I think that it's coming together so beautifully that all of our recommendations fit together like puzzle pieces into this larger idea of a new department to be able to execute these new ideas. It's really a beautiful thing. And I think when we present it, between the walk and talk and the community engagement subcommittees, we have a whole lot of overlap as to how to engage the community, as well as the website that's there to be able to make a comprehensive list of everything that already is present as resources. So yeah, I just wanted to say that the broader picture of what we have done here, culminating in a recommendation of that larger new department is so fantastic and exciting. So I look forward to this push.
Thank you. Other feedback?
So looking at this idea, it does seem very interesting and exciting. I like a lot of elements of it. I mean, I'm certainly supportive of the idea of having an Office for Immigrant and Refugee Services and a new council on LGBTQIA inclusion. I guess, one of my thoughts, and, maybe this gets beyond the conceptual and we don't want to go there, is that, some of the functions here in these different departments or units have to do with policy. Some of it has to do with outreach and engagement. And then what part of this is direct services? And, obviously direct services might take more staffing than the policy or the engagement pieces. You know, what part of this would be direct services that we are creating versus existing but moving over? Just how would this work? And you know, maybe that's too much into the weedy details. I mean, I like the idea of bringing everything together. That does make sense. And you know, sort of providing sort of a wraparound perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Chi-Chi. I think those will be important questions going forward. Yeah.
I just think we really need this. One thing that we've been hearing ongoing in our task force work from the Brookline Police Department is that they are doing a large number of these services because nobody else is. And this is a way of having folks who have a background in, who've been trained in community outreach, community support services, whether it's the walk and talk model, whether it's crisis intervention services, whether it's other types of services and supports to the community, actually be able to do this work and free up the Brookline Police Department to do the jobs that police departments do. It's, you know, that's when asked why, when we've asked police officers why they're doing this work, the answer has always been primarily because nobody else is. So I just think Brookline really needs this in order to make it a safer town for everybody.
Thank you, Ann. Malcolm?
Oh, I'm sorry. I actually didn't raise my hand until late. So if I'm behind somebody, I can go later.
Go for it.
So, and I just want to apologize. That was the first time I really seen that role and came back. I do wonder if there's something around or some space around employment or financial security or instability. I know we talk about people in public housing, which is a little bit different. You know, even from when I was a kid, most everybody I knew in public housing, their parents worked. You know what I mean? Like the financial insecurity was around different issues, but I'm talking about more like people who, like when they lose jobs, but also, yeah, I tend to think of it again more child-centric stuff that provides young people jobs, that builds their skills. So when they leave Brookline High School, they have a certain skill around work, which, you know, again, I think a lot more families need in Brookline than we give credit to at Brookline High School. I think we hear about the well-off who send their kids to enrichment things all summer. And I just don't think that's the wealth of the student body. I think that's just the wealth of the stories we hear. And so, yeah, I didn't know if that was a part of it or not. And I just can't really recall. And
yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah, it sounds like we need to build that out a little bit more. It does talk about programs designed to counteract economic, health, and other inequities, but exactly what you know, how we think about, how we conceptualize and define what these economic inequities are and how they manifest themselves is something that we'll need to talk more about. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Malcolm. Alexander?
One thing I wanted to mention, and this came up in a comment in our hearing last night, is that someone asked us to reframe how we were thinking about pre-crisis services, because they were talking about you really need to be thinking broader than this, because pre-crisis services is about employment, it's about housing, it's about access to healthcare, it's about fighting the many pressures that poverty puts on people. And I think that person was completely right. And I was sort of sitting there being like, you know, that's true, and that's important for us to be framing things that way. And also, you know, I can't wave a magic wand and solve those problems, unfortunately. But a social services department would go a really long way to helping with those kinds of problems. And I really believe that until we work on those, until we take all of that seriously and we listen to what that person said, in a lot of ways we're going to be dealing with symptoms in terms of what makes people call the police in the first place.
Right. Thank you. Bonnie?
Ooh, I'm having so many thoughts over here. I hope that there's room. Oh my God, my hand. There we go. I hope that there's room for the understanding that this department is not going to be the be all end all, and that collaborations with community efforts, collaborations with non-incorporated situations are considered, because for many of the reasons that Alexander just brought up, because this is the battle for equality and racial justice and food justice. This is not, we just have to keep a very broad manner of considering this. But have you found, Raul, examples of this elsewhere, other cities, other towns that do this, so that we can get a better grasp on what that might look like?
Yeah, and I can bring some of those in maybe to our next meeting or share it in the interim. But I think that there are communities that I think are recognizing that they need to change their orientation to these problems, the root cause orientation versus the symptoms orientation. And I'm part of one group, at least, that is going to be lobbying the Biden administration and its agencies to start to invest more in this space. And the thing that Mike rightfully points out is that I'm trying to say the right thing here. It's a lot easier and frankly cheaper, although still cost the town, to address the symptoms of problems. It's going to be a longer term effort to actually meaningfully reduce and ultimately eliminate the inequities that we're talking about. A generational problem, to be sure. And so I think an approach that only addresses the symptoms, I think, is one that believes at least tacitly, that these gaps will always exist. That there will always be racial gaps. There will always be these economic. They're just simply part of what our society is, and we'll do our best to help folks out when they really, really are down. Like, that can't be our orientation, and we see a lot more communities that are starting to experiment. And I'm happy to bring in some of those examples, maybe to our next meeting, or just to share them with folks to talk about this. But I think that is. Anyway, I'll stop there. I don't want to say too much today, but I think that's something that we need to really consider as a group that's focused on reimagining. And unfortunately, there aren't enough of us out there, groups focused on reimagining right now. But how we not just spend our dollars, but how we invest our dollars is really what this is a conversation about, I think. Yeah. All right, I'll get back to one other piece of that after Almas. Yeah.
No, just to add to somebody at our public hearing yesterday talked about Cambridge and the very robust human services department that they had. So that might have been one of the examples, Raul, you were mentioning. But just to mention that she apparently worked there and do a lot of stuff on pre-crisis and homelessness and psychiatric services. So just to mention that in response to the earlier question.
Yeah. Thanks so much. The maybe not last thing, but last thing for now, I wanted to say on this piece too is for a time now, I've been talking with Michael Alperin, the executive director of BHA, about things like baby bonds and investing in youth that live in public housing, but also subsidized housing within Brookline. And really, I know because I saw the word reparations in the chat, but really thinking about, again, what kind of investment we make, but that the investment needs to be generational, like in that way, like literally investing in kids that are born here or that move here into Brookline, and investing in them and making sure that they have a nest egg for college or to buy a home or to start a business or whatever it is. And for us to partner, as Bonnie said, with community organizations, but also like the town being all in on this. And it's different than the way that we normally budget, which is sort of year to year, but also planning ahead, certainly. But to think on a 20, 30 year, time frame in terms of the dollars that we're spending now that are going to mean a difference in somebody's life, nearly a generation from now. That's a very different way of thinking, particularly around municipal budgeting. And so in any case, I'm very excited to continue those conversations, maybe as part of these conversations, but I think what we're getting to is that there are larger issues at hand. The community engagement subcommittee has touched upon this. The vulnerable people and people in crisis subcommittee has touched upon this. The walk and talk subcommittee, I mean, all of us have been really circling around this idea that I don't know if it was Malcolm just mentioned, you can't solve, racial justice issues and racial injustice without also addressing economic issues, housing issues, transportation issues, environmental health issues, and the list goes on. So it really needs to be a whole community approach to solving these problems, which is why we need to invest significant resources in this space. Tweaks here and there based on our current model, I just don't think are going to get us there. Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts? Staff on the call, feel free to weigh in. Love to hear your perspectives too. Anybody? Anne.
Hi, everyone. So having come from Boston and a very rich health and human services component, there obviously with the City of Immigrants, they have an immigrant advancement department, an office, and do a lot of the wraparound services, obviously not by themselves, but they do act as a coordinator to get people to services. And I think that there's space to build this out. We have our Health and Human Services Department. We call it the Public Health Department generally, but I think we forget about the human services piece of it, where the Veterans Office is within there. But there is a place, I think, as we look at it organizationally, and to Mike Salmon's point of financially, is to be able to start and have a place to build from, and do that within there, and get to the point where, the end results at that last paragraph in your proposal is, an individual commissioner with 3 clinicians or staff people and an admin, that, we can work to build from there. And I think we at least have a space to build from. And, as someone who works in the employment area, but also just the people area and human resources, I think that there's a way to be able to start that conversation. Obviously the math and the finances is a big part of it, particularly in the upcoming fiscal year. If we were starting it in the big economic boom, it would be a lot easier conversation to have, I think. But where we're able to provide additional conduits for those services to our residents and for the folks who do that work. So I look forward to assisting where I can and being a part of that process.
It's terrific. Thanks, Anne. And Anne.
In terms of the economics, financial costs of creating such a department, I just want us all to bear in mind the savings we potentially make to the community. As Tim Black, the Cahoots staff member who we spoke with at the Vulnerable People subcommittee interview earlier in January, said that the Cahoots crisis intervention team actually, in the long run, saves the community money via people not being hospitalized for reason, like the wrong reasons. Emergency services cost a lot of money. Having an ambulance sent costs a lot of money. If we can have community folks provide these services and hopefully reduce the amount of hospitalizations to people in our community, we're actually saving money over the long run. So just in terms of thinking about our pitch, thinking about the longer term financial costs to running a department such as this, there are going to be cost savings. It's not going to be all just extra money being spent by the town to provide services, but we're going to, be supporting people to grow and to be able to reach their goals and to become more active folks in our community, and that results in cost savings to the town. So
I just want to caution.
Right.
I think you have to identify and talk about the savings that accrue to the town and affect the town's budget. And you're right that in the long term, the town may need to provide fewer services. It may need, it may be able to save money in certain ways. Saving on healthcare costs doesn't help the town budget. We don't pay for that.
No, I hear you. That was just one example.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, but I think it's important to emphasize the other piece of it, what you said is right on, that there are potential savings to the town, and it's that we need to emphasize, honestly, in order to sell this to the community, because it's taxpayers who are going to have to come up with the money.
All right, thanks to you both. Lloyd, I see you.
Yes, I just want to echo some of the things that Ann was saying. I think the mission here is to help all folks thrive, and a sort of a comprehensive approach that you're suggesting, I think will do that. From working for Brookline, I actually was the clinical director of our CRS program, Community Rehabilitation Services, which offered wraparound services to community members, especially folks who are at risk with mental health issues. And we did find that not only did people actually get better and way more functional in society, we also had willing partners in being involved more civically in their communities. So I think this is a win-win for everybody. I will add that Brookline did actually have, not on the magnitude that you're talking about, Raul, but we did have that sort of wraparound coordination going on. It was my position before I took this one. And we did do a lot of coordinating with those groups that you mentioned in that document. Again, not to the magnitude that you're suggesting, which I think is would be far more outreaching. We did not have the clinical staff and or the on the ground staff to do a lot of the work, but that's something that you're suggesting. I think that to make this work, you will definitely need to have that happen, but you do need those folks on the ground working.
Lloyd, I'd love to talk to you offline to learn some more about the history here.
Mm-hmm.
What was there before? Thank you for that. Yep. Malcolm?
I had to step away, so I hope I'm not repeating anybody. I really want to reiterate what Ann is saying. That's part of our sort of pitch, that yes, there's this money up front, but ultimately, not only are we doing what's best for the town as wellness, we're doing what's best for the town fiscally. And I agree with Mike, people will want to know that right up front. I think one thing I was saying is I don't think, to use a history term, Rome is built in a day. Part of our planning could be how to roll this out as we are figuring budget stuff, which I think is also part of, at least what I'm interpreting from Mike saying, yes, we have to say his costs and things like that, but you know, when I look at this, I see millions of dollars going to that. It doesn't have to start with $1 million, right? It could be starting with a department that looks at family services, and we get the staff for that as well as executive, and then, you know, we show the gains in that, and then start with another department. I don't say that to slow play it. Again, it's my area of experience is with schools. Like a lot of times you look at schools when they start new, it's one grade at a time until they get to the size they want. And again, I don't want to slow pay it because I think we need these services. So, you know, it doesn't have to necessarily be one at a time. I think what I'm saying is it doesn't have to be everything at the first, you know, off the bat. And so we can think about that as we project this out in terms of where's the greatest need, and start with that and have a plan, like, so that we're planning for the next year or whatever it is, or the next budget cycle, or, you know, how much we can chew at one time. Like, is it 2 or 3 programs in 1 year? You know what I mean? Like, I just feel like we can be thoughtful about how this rolls out to help our own cause.
Right. Thanks, Mel. Any other thoughts here or questions? All right. Good. Okay. Do folks feel, does anyone feel uncomfortable about, I should say, about having this incorporated into as part of our recommendations? You know, with the understanding that with respect to, I take, yeah, I think Mel's point earlier is that it's best at this point to keep it at this stage, conceptual. There's some details there enough for people to understand the direction here, but that you know, with Ann Braga's help and Lloyd's help, and Mel and Melissa Goff's help to figure out, you know, things like what something like this might cost and everything, and the points that Malcolm just made about rollout, and that Ann Braga made also about being able to sort of germinate this idea somewhere in a plot that already exists, and then as it grows, I'm thinking about gardening, as it grows, move it to a bigger space so that it can flourish even more. I think is what I was gathering from your comments there. So that sort of thinking that through still needs to happen. And I know, Mike, I know you want to be part of that conversation too. I'm sure you do. Right?
Yeah, I think, Ro, the one thing I would say about that one-page summary is that it's important to acknowledge the budget planning that needs to go into it.
Okay.
And I would definitely like you to add economic equity into the package of things that need to be addressed.
Okay. Maybe you and I can work on the language then for that, for the budget planning,
Sure.
economic equity. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, great. Okay. Anything else folks have to say about this? Good, bad, or indifferent? It won't be your only opportunity, but maybe for today it might be. All right. Thank you all for the thoughtful responses and consideration. Sit with it over the next week. If there are other thoughts that you have, you can always just send them directly to me, or feel free to save them for next week's meeting. If you have anything there, that's the week. Next Friday is when we're going to be putting together, and you know, hopefully it's a matter of doing exactly what Bonnie was talking about earlier. It's just taking these jigsaw puzzles that seem to fit and making a nice little puzzle out of them, right? But you know, if there are things, I will say this again, I've said it before, if there are things that you see in subcommittee reports that are not your own, that you think need to be addressed, please do share those with the subcommittee. In some cases, you can do that by commenting right on the document. In other cases, you can just simply email the members of that other subcommittee to say, hey, here are my thoughts. Make sure you copy Devin on that as well. And me too, if you like. I'm curious. But you can not just, you can do that, but please do that if you have thoughts that you'd like to share, so that that next Friday we don't end up in a situation where we're sort of having you know, a really long conversation about something that maybe could have been addressed in the draft earlier on. Okay. What else do you have? Anything for new business? And Chi-Chi's already made the announcement about the event tomorrow, the Lunar New Year celebration, 4 o'clock tomorrow. And I'll be there. I hope others will be too. Anything else on your minds that you'd like to share, or thoughts that you didn't get a chance to, that didn't fit in neatly to one of our agenda items that you feel like you'd like to share? Alexander? Yeah.
I'm thinking, I've been thinking a lot since hearing at our public hearing last night, folks being really interested and engaged and wanting to spread the word about our meeting on the 17th, what we're doing to publicize that, and what strategies we plan to use.
Yeah. Let's start with the base level. Devin, can you just tell us the basic things that you've been doing for all of the public hearings, and then we can talk about how to expand on that.
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. We have been employing a multi-prong approach to publicizing these, which is using the town's built-in Notify Me feature, as well as posting on the calendar, your subcommittee pages, and then we're running social media content anywhere from 2 to 4 times a week. There is no specific graphic for just the task force public hearing. That public hearing is captured in the larger graphic that was created to house all of the subcommittee public hearings, but that's definitely something that can be done. I did post this hearing early so that it could get on people's radars. I plan to do the Notify Me again next week and the week after, so that those folks can have a reminder. When folks register in advance too for webinars, they do get an email reminder saying that this is coming up, but we can, I'll continue to share in those channels. And if the group wants to make another graphic specific to this, that's definitely something that we can support as well.
Great. I'll also note that I sent the sort of the full list out to town meeting members earlier this week, and I will do the same for our February 17th, just one specific email about that hearing ahead of time to make sure that that town meeting members, there are 240 of them, are aware of that public hearing and, you know, invited to show up. And then I know that there are many different groups that folks have been sending stuff out to Brookline for Racial Justice and Equity, the Asian American Family Network. I'm sure others too. I'm not sure. Maybe we should. I don't know. Do you think, Alexander? Are you asking? Do you think it'd be helpful to track, you know, how we're sharing this to make sure we don't have any gaps, or what do you think?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know enough about good practice here
Right,
to really even answer that question. It's just,
yeah.
Thought I'd raise it for folks wiser than me.
Okay, great. Bonnie?
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, we can gather a list of key stakeholders, because many of those stakeholders are organizations that have, you know, the Teen Center, Mutual Aid Brookline, BHA, you know, to make sure all of these people get very specific emails directed at them to spread.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, not to give Lloyd more work. I don't know if we're using Lloyd's office to disseminate. In particular, one of the things I think that really dealt with public safety and children when I was growing up was the interfaith organizations. A lot of those churches are gone where my friends had to go, but those temples are still there, and some of those churches are still there, and other religious centers and things, to broaden it. And I know he has more than that, you know, Women's Commission, Women Thriving, all those other different groups. But I don't know. I feel like when it gets to Lloyd and it disseminates through the Office of Diversity, it goes really far.
Lloyd says sure. Sounds good. Hey, Devin, can we maybe just do a simple Google document where we just are able to, members of the task force can just share, maybe we can identify organizations and people can take, just responsibility, say, I'll be the one that sends something to that organization or to that particular person or whoever it is?
Yes.
All right, great. And over the next week, what we can do is, populate that form and then have a conversation. We can docket it as part of our agenda for next Friday to make sure that that we all know who's reaching out to whom and fill any gaps that might exist at that meeting, but we can populate it over the course of the next week.
There is a follow-up question that I have, and Bonnie, we can talk offline about creating a graphic that's similar in the branding to what you put together for the entire group's public hearings. A couple of residents who know how our postings work were curious when I posted the 17th public hearing and there was no link to the report. So I think it would be good to just acknowledge publicly the report will be in its final condition by next Friday.
Yes.
And so that will be posted presumably Wednesday or Thursday, and then it will be linked in all the appropriate places, the task force page, the calendar posting to the public hearing, as well as in our normal agendas and minutes location for meeting materials.
Anne, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say from the because I go to both task force and subcommittee meetings, I know that Casey Hatchett, the CSO for the police department, has an extensive list of community organizations, and you may want to start with that list, at least as a starting point, because there are, while it may be CSO contacts, it's still a ready list throughout the community so that you can.
Great idea. Thank you. Devin, do you think you can reach out and grab that list?
Yeah, I'll check in with Casey.
Thank you so much. Anne?
Also, I received a couple of days ago, yesterday, a list of Brookline and services and supports from Megan Smith at the Brookline Center that we added in appendix to our vulnerable people draft report. And there may be some organizations there that we could reach out to as well.
Okay, great. If you can share that somehow, I don't know if that's going to fit nicely into this Google document or in some other way. That'd be great. The other two things I wanted to share, one for everyone, that the all videos for the public hearings, with the one exception of the departmental analysis subcommittee hearing, sorry, we didn't record that one. But for all the other public hearings, they are embedded on the subcommittee pages on the town website. So if you go to the Select Board's Task Force to Reimagine Policing in Brookline, you'll be able to go back and watch at least 4 of the 5 subcommittee hearings on their various pages. So keep an eye out for that. The other thing that that Devin tells me, so we all have an idea of the schedule to come, is tentatively the tentative schedule for the Select Board for our work is to receive a presentation on March 2nd, to hold a public hearing on March 16th. It's like 2 weeks later, and then tentatively to have a vote on March 30th. And so just add those dates to your calendar. But that is the tentative schedule right now. I will say that somewhere in the middle of all of that, my partner and I will be having a baby. So I'm going to try to bring the best of me every single time. And maybe I'll just be so excited that it's going to be even the better part. But I just want to mention that March is going to be an interesting month. Let me tell you. So there we go.
Aw.
That's it.
Yeah, totally.
We'll demand pictures.
Sleep
Yes,
now.
absolutely. It's going to be great.
And I had something to say, and that wipes it right out of my brain. So
Whatever sleep you may think you've been missing because of these 8 o'clock meetings, you don't know what you're getting into, man.
Yeah, if you hear crying in the background, it's either the baby or it's me.
Or you.
It's gonna be awesome. All right, y'all. Love this group. Love everything you're doing. As I said at the end of all the public hearings, like just thank you all for your time and commitment and thoughtfulness and energy and everything that you've brought to this process. You know, the work will continue long after our work as this task force is done. And I know that we're not yet at the finish line, but it's really important just to thank all of you and to thank the staff that have just been such willing contributors in this, and everybody who's shown up to these hearings and shared their perspectives, which have just been so important. So I'm excited about where we are right now, and looking forward to continuing to build with you as we make these other public presentations. So thank you all for your work, and we'll see you soon. Take care, everybody.